One major component of the 1920s, as we had mentioned before, was the emergence of mass media. Mass media, we think of the big one being radio, and then also records. You also had movies, cinema, where messages were kind of displayed during World War One, especially. But mass media obviously has changed in 100 years. Mass consumption. Bottom line is, people could buy a lot. Okay, as you can see, there are huge quantities of goods, and people have money to spend on them. Um, Again, a lot of this had to do with buying on credit, installment programs, things like that. Mass consumption, again, advertising, we had mentioned before, and that was a major area of spending was on advertising. And I still think it's that way today. Have you ever turned on the TV and seen advertisement? You know, companies spend millions and millions of dollars to put their ads out. There you can see the Standard Oil there, the department stores, Woolworth, keeping in mind the five and dime stores, what they were called, markets, and that's definitely mass consumption. More advertising, as you can see, everything from breath mints to typewriters, flour, even have chewing gum. I don't know if they still say that. We'll be right back after these messages, but again, that's a major part. Consumer economy, again, many items evolved during the 20s. I see that Black& Decker electric tools, and I think of the DeWalt, which is a Black& Decker company. Cordless radio, red hot radio as it was called. Excuse me, Marconi invented wireless telegraphy, the telegraph in the 1890s, and then of course it evolves into radio, for lack of a way of saying it more scientifically. But this was a big deal. It actually brought people back to their homes. They sat around the radio to hear, listen to programs. It gave birth to commercial advertising. Sports games began being broadcast, politicians, and that's going to be big during the Great Depression, because a guy named Roosevelt is going to use the radio, which he called fireside chats. He would appear, well, not appear, but you could hear him on the radio talking about the conditions during the Great Depression. Newscasts, of course, major part of it. Let me show you this. If you look on the left, that is a famous book, The War of the Worlds. And I guess I can ruin the movie for you, or the book if you ever read it. But what happens is the Martians come to Earth and they start taking over the Earth. At the end, it turned out that the Martians weren't able to live based on their immune system on Earth, but obviously the people didn't know that. So they thought the Martians were attacking and people were dying. And if you look on the right there, the newspaper, what happened is people turned on the radio and they didn't know that that was a story. They didn't know that they were being told, basically read a novel to them on the radio. And many people actually did commit suicide over this. They thought the Russians, excuse me, Martians were attacking. And I mentioned Russia there because it was during the Red Scare. People were on nerve for that. And then they thought that the Martians were going to attack as well. So we can definitely show you about the power of radio. But that actually did happen. Obviously sad. Okay. CBS, as you can see there. And there you can see the details, what I was talking about. Okay, leisure activities definitely became big business, still is. Have you ever heard of the Super Bowl? Whether you're a Football fan or not, you probably have heard of the Super Bowl, maybe even tuned in on it. So certainly leisure activities, people make careers out of this today. Everything from betting the whole way down to playing and getting involved as general managers, etc. Sports became part of public education, extracurriculars, and all this can be traced back to the 20s. Mass consumption economy, as you can see there, advertising makes Americans want more and more, and that's something to think about. Americans, what do we buy? Do we buy what we need or do we buy what we want? Something to consider. Look at that last bullet point. Buying in credit was another new feature of the post war economy. Prosperity thus accumulated an overhanging cloud of debt, and the economy became increasingly vulnerable due to disruptions of the credit structure. Okay, so standard of living: electricity, natural gas, telephones, piped water, automobiles, radios, the phonograph, which is a record player, commercial entertainment. Income increased 10% for workers. That wasn't everybody, okay? Okay. Great migration, as you can see. We talked about this before. The big impact there, of course, we mentioned the Chicago race riots before, and another big impact will be called the Harlem Renaissance, which happened up in New York. And what's the context of that? Harlem Renaissance. I didn't actually put in the primary source there, but you can see some of the context of what was going on, um, audience, etc. But let me go through what exactly the Harlem Renaissance was, and this will make more sense. 20s called the Jazz Age. Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual movement. Um, Many people drew heavily on African heritage, poetry, literature. It really was a great era of intellectual thought, of artistry, music, excuse me, poetry. It happened up in New York, in the neighborhood, as you can see there on the map. Langston Hughes was a major part of this. He was an American poet, novelist, playwright, short story writer, newspaper columnist, best known as one of the principal figures in the Harlem Renaissance movement. Jazz Age, part of the Harlem Renaissance, the 1920s. Take a look at that on the right side there. I too sing America. I'm the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and I eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when nobody comes. Nobody, nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen. Then besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. That's the one where I showed you the context, audience, point of view, purpose. And I think you can relate to and understand relating this writing of Langston Hughes. Okay. You can see the new movement, which was to criticize Jim Crow, the racial segregation. Fighting against the pervasive stereotypes, racism, looking to progress, social movements, politics. And you can see some of the major parts there of the 20s all goes together. And I'll just go to this. Harlem Renaissance coincided with the Jazz Age, And obviously, you can read this for yourself. I like those last three lines there: music, film, theater, all of which fully benefited from the creativity and newly discovered contributions of African Americans. Age of Prosperity, which will be our next part of this unit on the 20s, but I'll just show you that, and that's where we're going next. Okay, pause here.